Advocates of the EU-Mercosur agreement praise it as promising for trade between the EU and the South American countries of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay. Negotiations took 27 years. From the outset, disputes arose over major shortcomings regarding environmental and animal welfare issues. No solutions have yet been found, but wording has been developed that is intended to reassure the public and the affected parties in the agricultural and environmental sectors. As a result, animal welfare is recognised as a key factor, but there is no binding alignment with EU animal welfare standards. Critics predict that EU animal welfare standards in the agricultural sector will come under pressure at the latest when European producers take to the streets to demand equal opportunities, that is to say, lower animal and environmental protection requirements. A major animal welfare problem is evident in what are known as cattle feedlot systems in the Mercosur countries, which are designed for mass and low-cost production conditions. For example, it is claimed that cattle in the Mercosur countries enjoy better conditions on huge pastures than animals on EU farms. The animals on industrial fattening farms are not mentioned. The conditions there are incomparably different. Just how different can be seen from our investigations in Argentina, Brazil and Uruguay from 2025 and 2026. We visited 21 fattening farms authorised for EU exports. To obtain a proper professional assessment of what the feedlot system means for the animals, we presented our film footage to cattle expert Dr. Cornelia Buchli for evaluation.
Feedlots are intensive cattle fattening farms where the animals are fattened to slaughter weight in a relatively short time and in relatively small areas. This is achieved through the use of feed that contains a high proportion of concentrates.
High proportions of concentrated feed and low proportions of roughage, meaning almost no hay or grass, pose health risks for ruminants. Cattle normally ruminate for 7 to 8 hours a day. One typical consequence of a high proportion of concentrated feed is a condition known as rumen acidosis. This refers to an excessive buildup of acid in the rumen. As a result, the entire digestive system becomes unbalanced, which can lead to death. The type of feed is not the only factor that influences the weight gain.
With intensive fattening, the animal's limited ability to move around is of clear benefit to the process, as the aim is for them to gain a lot of weight as quickly as possible.
The weight gain target of up to 1.5 kilograms per day cannot be achieved with pasture grazing. Grass and plenty of exercise would vastly extend the fattening time. The one-sided approach to animal husbandry and feeding is also evident in the cattle's behaviour, referred to as pica. We show Cornelia Buchli footage of animals licking soil that is contaminated with feces.
That could be a sign of a lack of stimulation or a deficiency, for example of minerals such as phosphorus, calcium or sodium.
The feedlot pens bear no relation to the romantic images of grassland. They are fenced areas where mobility is limited, nutrition is unbalanced, and there is a lack of manure management. Hygiene does not seem to matter. The ground alongside the troughs is solidified by concrete slabs. These are not only occupied by animals who want to eat, but also those who would otherwise be unable to find a firm resting area. They block other animals' access to the only available food. Lower-ranking animals struggle to find resting areas that do not endanger their health.
I can't see any dry resting areas.
When it rains, the ground softens and turns into deep mud containing feces and urine. This affects the animal's health. They sink into the cesspit, not just for a moment, but permanently.
They are essentially forced to remain in this mud that is contaminated with feces and urine. When areas are contaminated with feces and urine, it can be problematic for the hooves, as the skin on them is attacked, which can lead to hoof issues.
In all 21 feedlots, the hygiene measures, cleanliness and protection against extreme weather conditions are insufficient or non-existent. This can be seen in this footage that we recorded in the winter.
The dirt on the animals, containing feces and urine, is problematic for their skin. It attacks the skin and can cause inflammation.
In summer, when temperatures rise to well above 30 degrees, cattle need shade and water. With normal feed, 40 to 50 litres of water per day are needed. If the feed mainly consists of concentrates, or in other words dry matter, the amount of water required is even higher. In the EU, regulations clearly stipulate that cattle need clean drinking water. If this does not come from the tap, farmers must ensure the water quality. The European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, requires a sufficient number of easily accessible watering areas. Here, however, mud and overcrowding prevent access. Competition-induced stress for the animals should also be avoided. We show the expert typical troughs in the documented feedlots.
There's no way the water is of drinking water quality, so that's not a suitable water supply.
In diesen beiden Tränken sehen wir, dass
In these two troughs, we can see that the color of the water, if you can even call it that, is pretty much as brown as the ground.
Algen oder Bakterien im Wasser.
Algae or bacteria in the water, for example cyanobacteria, commonly known as blue-green algae, produce toxins that can severely damage various organs or even the animal's nervous system. In acute cases, this can even result in death. If an animal had the choice, it wouldn't drink such water or take on this kind of liquid. But given the high temperatures, it's vital to the animal's survival that it takes on fluid.
The troughs are surrounded by solid areas made of concrete slabs. Some sections have broken off, leaving sharp edges. These pose a risk of injury to hooves and legs. When the troughs are positioned between two pens, the access to drinking water is even worse.
Wir sehen hier, dass die Tränke.
Here we can see that the trough is positioned between two pens. That means the animals can only get to it from one side. They can't even stand around the trough, so the number of areas from which they can potentially drink is reduced by half.
Die Hälfte.
The ground around the watering areas is damper and therefore cooler. If there is no other way for them to cool down, the animals lie down around the watering area, blocking other animals' access to it. Here too, animals are lying down and blocking lower-ranking animals' access to water. This footage shows how important shade is to the animals on hot days. The workers have barely finished erecting a shelter when the cattle flock below its protective roof. Others lie under tattered tarpaulins to make use of the residual shade. Those unable to find protection are exposed to the direct sunlight and dust. This affects their eyes and airways. Their suffering is obvious.
I can see an animal there that is open mouth breathing. It's also coughing occasionally. Extreme heat stress can lead to open mouth breathing.
The heat stress in this group of cattle is highly evident.
Here we see animals breathing heavily and rapidly. Increased saliva production and rapid breathing are attempts to overcome the excessive heat.
In the same group is an animal with a watery eye, indicating inflammation.
Such eye infections can typically occur when the cornea or conjunctiva is damaged, for example by dust particles, but also direct sunlight.
Animals that are unable to find protection suffer greatly from heat stress. In their desperation, they go to places they would usually avoid.
Considering the context of high temperatures and direct sunlight, we can presume that these cattle are trying to cool down, so are looking for the cool offered by water. As we can see, the water here is highly contaminated. You can barely even refer to it as water anymore. These are muddy puddles contaminated with feces and urine.
Drinking from this puddle puts the animal's health at risk.
This water will also contain bacteria and ammonia, nitrite. Nitrite, for example, binds to hemoglobin, which leads to a lack of oxygen and even a shortness of breath and death from asphyxiation.
It is also dangerous to the animals when hunger, heat stress and thirst forces them into areas where multiple hazards are posed by rubbish and unsafe ground.
The animals are at risk of injuring themselves on sharp objects.
The sharp, broken edges of the concrete slabs are also dangerous.
This is problematic because an animal can trip down them and injure itself, or even break a limb.
If hierarchic fighting occurs, the risk of injury is even greater. It is unclear what has caused these injuries. What is clear, however, is that in the sheer mass of animals, injuries remain undetected and untreated.
This animal's front leg is severely lame. It is shifting its weight off the leg even when standing still, and when it walks we can see that the lower part of the limb is loose. This shows that the limb is fractured. This animal is struggling to move around at all. To limit the suffering of this obviously untreated animal, it would need to be removed from the herd and euthanized as soon as possible.
The cattle remain in the feedlots for up to 120 days. On reaching a slaughter weight of 350 to 600 kilograms, their final stop is the slaughterhouse. Workers drive them together and use electric prods to force them up the ramp. These electric prods are used systematically, regardless of whether another animal is in the way, preventing forward movement. This is another violation of EU animal welfare standards. Does the feedlot system meet EU animal welfare requirements? Clearly not. The day after our interview with Dr. Cornelia Buchli, she writes to us,
"I can't stop thinking about what I saw. The lack of weather protection and associated heat stress are preventing these animals from being able to adapt to their situation. Species-appropriate animal husbandry means not overwhelming their adaptive capacity. European legislation requires the animals' natural needs to be considered. One natural need of cattle is the species' typical stimulation associated with eating, for which they need roughage, that is, food with a high crude fiber content.
The husbandry and feeding of cattle in the South American feedlot systems are cruel, not species appropriate, and fully incompatible with EU animal welfare standards. The trade agreement between the EU and Mercosur makes it imperative for the European Commission to immediately present the promised revised version of EU animal welfare regulations. We need clear and enforceable provisions that apply equally to all imported products.